Thank you, Jeremy and Generations. I was just reminiscing with Jeremy that I think it was 2.5 years ago, I did my first little educational, event with them a couple years ago. So, my business has grown a lot since then, and it has to do a lot with partnerships with agents, with real estate agents that are also in the business of not just trying to get deals and make money, but help people and think about new ways and new creative ways to bring value and to bring things to the table that ultimately separates yourself from the thousands and thousands of agents in the area that are trying to target the same type of client. I'm a financial advisor, dime a dozen. You can Google financial advisor just like you can Google real estate agent. We're to dime a dozen. So why would someone want to do business with me? Gaston Escudero, why would someone want to do business with yourself? We have access to the same information, same economy, interest rates are the same for everyone else, but why you? And it really comes down to, in my perspective, educating people on things they don't know. Educating people on things they don't know simply, and then relentless follow-up. And I think that is a recipe on top of being likable for why you can get more business than the person next to you. So by a show of hands, I'm gonna be respectful of anyone that has not heard me before or doesn't know about what it is that I do. So if you've heard me before, which a few from the Lynch group, this is like their 15th time hearing me talk. So I want to have these ladies come up here and maybe talk about what they're doing. No, I'm just kidding. But so show of hands, does anyone know what a 1031 exchange is? 1031 exchange? Anyone not know what a 1031 exchange is? Every agent should know what a 1031 is. Okay. Has anyone not helped someone at least once do a 1031 exchange? You know about it, but you've never actually helped someone do it. Couple. Okay. No big deal. So the 1031 exchange. So I'm a financial advisor, and the company I'm with is Bangerter Financial Services, and it's a firm up north I'm part of. They kind of do my back office paperwork and things like that, but I really have my own book of business, my own office. I have 2 people that work for me, and we've got a huge book of business here locally, and we focus on really 5 main core pillars of wealth management, most of which are all pertaining to real estate, wealth management, real estate advisory and wealth management, mixed with certain IRS tax codes, mixed with, the real estate market, and helping people save taxes when selling any kind of real estate at the end of the day. And so Section 1031 of the tax code is the longest standing tax code for real estate, ultimately. It's been around for about 103 years. If you buy a piece of income producing real estate, investment property, land, anything, you can't live in the house. You buy a piece of investment property and you have any aspiration to sell it down the road, there's typically appreciation, right? The property's gone up in value, right? That's great. Someone wants to sell that property, they can't take constructive receipt of the proceeds. They can't touch the money. Unlike a primary residence, the buyer can't wire you the money to your personal account. It's got to go to a third-party 1031 accommodator account in your name. And when the proceeds are hit at that account, you have 45 calendar days to identify another like-kind property of equal or greater in value. You bought for a couple $100,000, you sell for $1 million. You decide you want to sell it before you close on the property. You have to hire a 1031 accommodator to write in the language that you are doing a 1031 exchange. And then the buyer will wire your exchange account, the equity, essentially. Once it hits that account, you got 45 days to identify another property that's $1 million or greater. If you don't do that in 45 days, that is a failed exchange. That is a failed exchange. I get calls all the time on day 43 and 44, all the time, of people, most of which, to be honest, are agents not educating their clients. That's what it comes down to. It's agents not educating your clients. Is this a primary residence? Is this a secondary home? Or is this an investment property? 3 very distinct kind of assets. All have different solutions for all 3. Do you live here, Mr. or Mrs. Smith? Is this a second home? Or is this an investment property? Right? So those are very, very important. Anyone you're talking to every single day, you need to find out distinctly what kind of property is your residential, are these three categories. And people will wait until they sell the property after the fact and then scramble, and they don't have anything in mind that they're reinvesting into, right? The reason why the 1031 exchange is the most powerful tax code is because you never have to pay taxes if you do it correctly. I've got clients that have property that they've been managing for 50 years. 50 years. They've been a landlord for 50 years. They bought their first property 50 years ago, their primary residence, converted it into a rental, right? Then they sold it, 1031 exchange into something else. Then they 1031 exchange into something else, and they built this wealth over their lifetime, right? Buy a property for a couple $100,000, sells for $1 million. Maybe then you reinvest into a $1.5 million property. And then maybe 6 years later, you sell that one for $2 million or $2.5 million. Then you reinvest it and buy a $3 million property. You can do that over a lifetime and build generational wealth and never have to pay taxes. If you choose not to 1031 exchange, which some people either choose not to do it or they forget and they mess up and they have a failed exchange, you're paying 14% state, 14%. You're paying 23.8% federal, right? Plus, if you've owned property for a long time as a rental, you're depreciating, right? Does anyone know what depreciation is? Depreciation? No? In layman terms, you bought a property for a couple $100,000. Every year, the IRS gives you a small assumption that your property is going down in value from wear and tear, and you can write off your taxable income off of the value. So if you're earning $30,000 in rent, you can report that you're only earning $10,000 in rent. So that $20,000 is kind of written off and not reported. That's depreciation. So that means your property goes down in value by $20,000, essentially. And then you do that over a couple decades, that depreciates your property close to zero. You owe that back at 25%. It's called depreciation recapture. So whatever you've written off, you multiply that by 25%, you owe that in taxes if you choose not to 1031 exchange. So that could be around 40% off the top if someone fails to do a 1031 exchange properly. So the reason why I just want to spend a few minutes on that is because just the regular rules of the 1031 exchange, people don't realize. Even clients that have done 1031 exchanges go, isn't it like 72 days identification? I'm like, nope, it's 45 days. It's been 45 days for many, many, many decades. It hasn't changed. So there's just making sure that you're clear on the identification timeline. And so 45 days to identify, 180 days to close. Someone dies while owning a rental property. If someone dies, there's a step up in cost basis upon someone passing away. They bought a property for $200,000. They've owned it for a while. Now it's worth $1 million. That person dies. You can get an appraisal on that property. The heirs get an appraisal. And then there's a step up in basis. So now that property, according to the IRS, is not profit for the heir or for the estate. It's considered basis. Just as if someone were to buy their own property for $1 million and then they decide a week later to sell it, there's no profit. It's $1 million in cost basis. That's not taxable. So if you do the 1031 exchange correctly, you build a lifetime of generational wealth, never paying taxes, and then having some assets to pass down to your kids tax-free. 20 years ago, the IRS and the SEC structured a real estate 1031 exchange fund, if you will, called a DST, Delaware Statutory Trust. 20 years ago was really the beginning of the IRS and the SEC. The SEC is what regulates the Securities Exchange Commission or New York Stock Exchange, bond market, annuities, stocks, all that kind of stuff is regulated by the SEC. 20 years ago, or actually about 21 years ago, a legal trust was created called a DST, Delaware Statutory Trust for short. All it is, it's a legal trust that owns and operates institutional income-producing real estate on behalf of investors. That's it. That's all it is. It's a real estate fund that's managing tens of millions of dollars of real estate value on behalf of investors. And so these top 9 questions and solutions that I gave you guys, these are like FAQs on DSTs. I have clients right now that have owned real estate for 40, 50 years, and they're tired of dealing with the tenants and the toilets and the trash. They're tired of getting calls from tenants. They're tired of negotiating lease terms. They're tired of paying property taxes. And the very asset that has built them wealth over a lifetime is now becoming a burden. Dealing with the day-to-day hassle of being a landlord in your 60s, 70s, and 80s is not as glamorous as it once was when you were building wealth. So preserving wealth, quality of life, more time on your hands to enjoy the grandkids and travel and to just enjoy your life. Typically when people are working throughout their lifetime, they've got 401ks, they've got pensions. What happens when you retire? You roll that over to a financial advisor to manage your assets on your behalf to help you transition into retirement. There really isn't a way to transition into retirement as a landlord because you're still dealing with tenants and toilets and trash, and you're still getting calls from the plumber. Even if you have a property manager, that property manager still has to call you to ask you, how much are you willing to pay for this expense that I found yesterday talking with the tenant? So even if you got a property manager, you're still not really hands off. You're still involved mentally and emotionally and part of that property. So today in Orange County is about $340 billion worth of real estate between ages 60 and 80 years old. $340 billion worth of real estate value between ages 60 and 80 years old in Orange County. Are you aware of that? Are you actively doing anything to help this aging demographic learn some different solutions on how to get out of their properties and things like that, right? And so there's urgency here. I've been talking about this for 3 years. Thousands of agents I've educated. Not a lot of them are doing anything about it. That's just the truth. The DST, the Delaware Statutory Trust, is the best way for an aging landlord to retire. You've got multi-billion-dollar real estate companies. 20 years ago, when this DST was created, Wall Street firms go, we've been managing real estate for 50, 60 years. Why don't we buy property with our cash and our balance sheet, use this trust as a means to give the average investor access to our stuff, to give us access to the billions and billions of dollars that we manage, and the proof of concept and the access that we have, better lending terms, better pricing, more information, right? When Harvard and Yale and Princeton and all the huge insurance companies that we all look to, right? When we're studying the economy as a financial advisor, how are institutional investors allocating their money? That's what you look to. What are the smartest people doing with their money? And they're typically not people, they're entities. Pension funds, endowments, insurance companies, mutual funds. Where are people that are managing hundreds of billions of dollars? Where are they allocating their money? They're doing real estate. How are they doing real estate? They're not buying property themselves. They're investing in funds. They're investing in real estate funds that are managed by multi-billion-dollar real estate companies. These are the types of companies that are buying properties and structuring this DST trust around these properties and creating a 1031 exchange fund. That's what it is. So when Mr. and Mrs. Smith wants to sell their rental property here locally for $1 million, and you as the agent find that out, you've got to scramble and find something in 45 days for that client, right, at $1 million or more, depending on the price point. That's not a lot of time, number one. Number two, a lot of these aging landlords don't want to sell. Even if you can find them a property to reinvest into, they don't want to sell. Why? Because they don't want to have to run the risk of not finding something in 45 days. They don't want to be a landlord anymore. They don't want to have to deal with another property and another tenant and another location. It's just too much going on. There's just too many things to consider. So what do? They sit and they don't do anything. They do nothing. I'm just going to hold the property until I die, is what I hear. And the DST is really the only thing that I've seen that gives an aging landlord confidence to say, you know what, maybe we should sell. Maybe we should get out of the landlord business. Maybe it's a good time to get out. And so a couple of some characteristics on the DST real quick. So the DST is a legal trust that owns and operates real estate on behalf of investors. And the operators of the day-to-day are multi-billion-dollar real estate companies. So these DSTs, $100,000 is the minimum. And you could 1031 exchange your proceeds and buy equity interest in these real estate DSTs. That satisfies the 1031 exchange requirement. You're not buying shares of a company. You're not buying a business. You're literally getting fractional interest in the real estate. You own a portion of that building. So as a financial advisor, I'm a fiduciary and I have access to 45 different DSTs that are available across the country that have been scrutinized, they're already purchased, they're already financed, and they're scrutinized by third-party accounting firms and due diligence firms. So I have all the due diligence materials on exactly how the properties were purchased and financed, where they're located, what states they're located in, how diversified the local economy is in that specific area of the state. Everything that you would want to possibly think of is all in the due diligence materials that I have access to. So when someone says, you know what, maybe I will sell, they can look at a menu of 45 different options. Apartment complexes in Texas, apartment complexes at the University of Notre Dame, which would be considered student housing, right? Triple net lease commercial, self-storage, senior living, right? All these different food groups of real estate. And so the next thing I wanted to kind of touch on is why does someone own real estate to begin with? Right? When someone buys an investment property, they're buying it for really a couple reasons. They're buying it for monthly cash flow, monthly income. They're buying it for appreciation to build wealth, and they want the tax write-offs. Those are really the three main reasons why someone would want to own an investment property, right? But goals change for people. If they're in their 80s versus if they're in their 30s or 40s, it's a completely different ballgame as to what's most important to them as it pertains to their current real estate holdings. And most of my clients don't even realize how their properties are even performing. They love to quote me, oh yeah, I've got a $3 million rental, I'm getting 40, 50 grand a year. But they've got trash, they've got HOA, they've got property taxes, they have expenses, they have ongoing maintenance, they have debt that they're servicing every month. They've got ongoing expenses that they need to remove from the bottom line to see what are you truly netting on your rental property. On top of which, they're 70 or 80 years old. On top of which, maybe their health is not in good shape. Or they've got 5 grandkids, got multiple kids. How do you even think about wanting to pass down these properties efficiently to your kids? So there's all these things that are kind of swirling in these investors' minds, but they have no way to really ever sit down and see if there's a way out, essentially. And so what I love to do for people is I love to ask a couple of there's 9 main questions that we're going to go through. I'm just going to do it kind of a little quickly. Question number 1 on this sheet, and this is you asking one of your prospects. Are you tired of your tenants, toilets, and trash? How do you like being a landlord? Just ask. How do you like being a landlord? Do you have good tenants? Do you have bad tenants? What's your experience being a landlord? And just see what they say, right? The DST is the ultimate 1031 exchange retirement strategy, right? A DST, these are income producing properties. A real estate company will go out and buy a $50 million apartment building. It's income producing. These are brand new, newly built apartment buildings, cash flowing between 4, 5, 6% a year in cash flow. When someone 1031 exchange and buys an equity interest in a DST, they're getting monthly income. They're getting monthly income. They're also participating in the potential upside of that property. They're also getting the tax deductions, right? Depreciation and operating expenses are getting passed through to the investor in the form of a loss. So the 3 reasons why someone buys a property, income appreciation and tax deductions, they get all 3 of those things in the DST. And so that's just something that I wanted to touch on. Second question, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, is your rental income fully taxable? So what's the first thing that comes out if income's fully taxable? If you're an agent talking to a client and they say, my income's fully taxable, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Capital gain.
Well, Yeah, capital gains. But what's the first thing that comes to mind if someone says my rental income is fully taxable? Anyone know? It means that person has held their property for more than 27 years, which means what? They have no more tax deductions. Why? Because that property is fully depreciated. My property is fully taxable. They've lost one of the three main benefits of real estate, which is your income being sheltered from taxes, rental income. So is your income fully taxable? The DST enables investors to get brand new depreciation schedule. So the income inside of the DST is sheltered from taxes. So that's most of the older clients that own rental property have fully depreciated rental property. And their income is fully taxable. So if you're earning $20,000 a year after expenses, that's taxable $20,000. And if you're in the 40% tax bracket, multiply that by 40, then you deduct that out. That's your net, Mr. and Mrs. Client at 75 years old. That's not feasible in retirement, especially if you've got a couple $1 million of equity. That's an underperforming property. That's very, very common with older clients because they're not professional operators. They're not institutional clients. They're doing the best they can. And a lot of them don't want to admit that their property is underperforming. So it's a little bit of like, you don't want to say, hey, your property sucks. It's underperforming. You guys got to wake up and raise rents. They're just doing the best they can. They've got a lot of things to consider, and they don't realize that this property is underperforming and not working for them in retirement, which is what? Strong cash flow, predictability, and more time on their hands, right? Third question, which kind of is what I was mentioning before, is your rental property underperforming? So, I just did an analysis for an agent yesterday. He said, okay, my client's got a property for $1.5 million, HOA, trash, some interest that he's paying every month, some mortgage payments. He's got a property manager. He's got all these expenses. So I did a cash flow analysis. I've got a really cool software that spits out all the categories of expenses and shows what's your gross rent every year, what's your net cash flow, what's your return on equity, what's your yield, your net yield, 2.15% on this $1.5 million rental. I did a quick little analysis, and I very conservatively reinvested, she had about $140,000 of debt. So I reinvested $1.3 million into 4 different DSTs, right? Because when you do a DST, you don't have to put it all into one deal. You can spread it out over a couple of different offerings, right? I put about $340,000 across 4 different deals, and the cash flow would be 4.69% cash flow on $1.3 million. That's more than double what she would be earning right now. So I just sent over, this is the analysis. Here's a DST hypothetical, very conservative. I'm not over-promising returns. It's very conservative, Class A, high-quality real estate with good track records of these companies. That's doubling her income overnight. That's going to be a really cool, powerful conversation for that agent to have with that client, looking at side-by-side comparison, right? Because they've never had anything like this done before. So that property is underperforming, right? I would say if it's not yielding at least what bonds are yielding, it's underperforming. If you can get more money in the savings account, it's underperforming. Plus, if it's fully depreciated, it's extra underperforming because that's a fully taxable underperforming asset. And people are not looking at this stuff. I just did a little exercise with Katie, and it's powerful to see, right, how underperforming these properties are. Even the smart ones that have a lot of money think they're performing well, but they're really not. So, question 4. Are you tired of tenant turnover, vacancies, and gaps in rental income? You have one rental property and you're 80 years old. That tenant moves out, no more income until you add more expense to make the property ready to go for the next tenant. You might have a couple months worth of vacancy, right? So that's kind of one of the bigger fears of most of my clients. They don't want to rock the boat. So what do? They don't raise rents. And they deal with maybe more pain in the butt tenants and they would rather deal with because they don't want to rock the boat. They can't afford to have a gap in rental income. If you have one tenant, one single family rental home, you've got one source of income. You've got one family or couple that's paying you rent every month. If you invest $1 million across 4 different DSTs, right? One DST might be a 350 unit apartment complex, 98% occupancy. Another DST might be a 450 unit student housing complex at the University of Notre Dame. Another DST might be 5 triple net lease commercial tenants that are backed by high investment grade credit of that business. Maybe a business is renting out some space. Fourth might be self-storage. Might be a 1,000 unit portfolio of self-storage assets. If you add up all the units across that allocation, that's thousands. Thousands of income producing tenants paying rent to the DST operator that gets passed through to the investor. So if you're 80 years old, is one unit less risky, or is having 3,000 units generating you a higher return every month? What's riskier in retirement? One tenant or thousands of tenants? So that's the change in the perception, that they don't know what they don't know. They don't even realize that this is probably a safer option than them keeping and holding their property on top of the underperformance and all that kind of stuff that comes with it. And so that's one thing. Are you tired about today's high interest rates? I have clients that own rental property and they might have a mortgage on their property, or they want to sell and they want to maybe buy something else, but they don't want to have to go get a loan from a bank. If you have debt on your rental property, I'll give you an example. You have a property that's worth $1 million. You have a $200,000 mortgage on there, right? $800,000 is equity, right? When you sell that rental property and you do a 1031 exchange, whether you buy your own property or you do a DST, you have $800,000 of equity. You need to buy $1 million, right? Because it's equal or greater in value with the 1031 exchange. So where does that $200,000 come from? You either cough it up with cash or you go get a loan. Most clients, either that are older, they probably don't have enough income to apply for a loan. And if they do, they don't want to get the higher rate. So they sit, they don't sell. They kind of stay put. The DSTs come pre-packaged with financing. These $50 billion entities are closing on $100 million properties at a time and financing these assets with their balance sheet. They're financing these assets with huge lenders and banks and third-party companies that are lending, and they're getting $30, $40 million loans. So the pricing and all the things that comes with closing on these properties is built into the balance sheet of the company that's doing all this. And when someone invests in a DST, they actually get an equity interest and they get an interest in the debt. So if they need to replace a loan on the 1031 side, you can replace it via the DST. And it's non-recourse. So non-recourse means that you get access to debt without having to get approval. There's no personal liability. There's no capital calls. There's nothing. It's literally a free loan that's on the property. So I'll give you an example. DST company buys a property for $100 million. They put $60 million down, $40 million of which was financed. What's $40 million divided to $100 million? That's 40%. 40% of that property is financed. You put in $1 million into that property, only 60% of the property is equity. So your million is only 60% worth of your interest in the whole building. So your $1 million now buys you an additional 40% worth of real estate automatically by buying this security, this DST security. So you get a $400,000 loan added to your transaction. That's a free loan. That's non-recourse. That solves the, hey, I've got debt I got to replace. I don't want to go get a mortgage if I sell it and go buy something else. Well, you don't have to. These DSTs now have all the risk on their balance sheet. I've got a client right now today. She's got $60 million worth of real estate. She's got a multiple luxury rental properties overlooking the ocean. One of them is $15 million, and she's got a $4 million loan. She has another commercial property worth $20 million with $4 million of debt. So she's got $8 million of debt that she's servicing between just these two properties. And her rental property, the residential, is empty. It's been empty for a while. She says the tenants are just pains in the butt with that price point. Just pains in the butt. The commercial property, there's been some rezoning stuff going on in Huntington Beach, and they're building stuff over there that's kind of turning off tenants to want to work there. So her rental income's dropped in half, and she's 68. So she's getting calls from the lender. Hey, we see that your rental income's falling. We don't see any rents coming in. Are you going to be able to keep continuing to pay the mortgage? If she sells her two properties, she gets to pay off all $8 million of her debt and replace all $8 million into DSTs of debt. She's removing her debt obligations off of her personal balance sheet and putting it on the balance sheet of these DST companies. That is extremely, extremely beneficial in life-changing conversations that you can have with people that are burdened by debt on their properties. And if they sell it, they can get that debt they need to buy the next 1031 via a DST. That's a very important point that I can get into one-on-one if you guys have more questions on it. Question 6, and we only have 9 questions. So question 6, are you worried about estate planning? If someone owns a rental property and they die and you have kids, right, that you want to pass down rental property to, and those kids have grandkids, so maybe there's 5, 6, 7 people in the pot in the living trust that's going to get all your rental property. They all have to vote on how to take over the property. Maybe you've got 3 kids. One kid wants to live in the property when you die. One kid wants to sell it, and one kid wants to convert it into a rental or buy it or whatever they want to do. If you reinvest into DSTs, you can parcel it out, literally fractional interest. If you invest $500,000 in a DST and you've got 5 heirs, you can break up that $500,000 DST in fifths, essentially, and have a fractional interest of the DST going to certain heirs. So rather than them having to take over rental property, they can take over the real estate DST and continue to take over the income, or they can liquidate it tax-free. So the estate planning is very, very appealing for a lot of older clients. Are you tired of California rent restrictions, high property taxes, and tough landlord laws? Very, very common headache and issue that I see with a lot of my clients. They hate California, unfortunately. I don't like to use the word hate, but when 90% of your clients are saying the word hate, you can say it because it's the truth, because that's what they tell me. They hate California landlord laws. Yes. They hate the property taxes. They hate that they can't raise rents more than 10% or 5% a year. And there's even more pains in the butts in regards to down payment or a security deposit, and if you can get that back or not, how quickly you can vacate people. There's all these laws that are causing issues for investors that maybe they're not aging, but maybe they're just tired of being a California landlord. Maybe they're 50 years old and they're tired of being a California landlord. DSTs don't own property in California. They own properties in states that are very business and landlord friendly, where people are moving to. People are leaving California more than when they're moving here. More people are leaving than moving. So where are people moving to? Where are the taxes more favorable, and where is it easier to run a business and run real estate? That's where these DSTs are purchasing property. If someone's in the process of a 1031 exchange and they're already doing one, and maybe the DST is not for them, if they're selling $1 million property, all cash, you've got 45 days to find another $1 million property or more, right? What happens on day 43, you find something that's worth $800,000. An $800,000 property, you can close that for the client, but there's still $200,000 of leftover equity. So as long as all of the proceeds are buying like-kind investment real estate, the DST can do that carve out. So $800,000 gets closed on a rental property with you, the agent. Another $200,000 gets closed in the DST. So you're active and passive at the same time. So that's called leftover equity. And then lastly, if someone's considering doing a 1031 exchange, the biggest fear they have is the 45-day window. You can always let them know, hey, before you sell, talk to Gaston and learn about what the DST is. Even if you don't want to do it, you should always identify a DST as a backup option, always, when you're listing a property. You should never do a 1031 exchange again for the rest of your careers as agents without having the DST as a backup option. Because if something falls through that's outside of your control, you'll get blamed. That's just the way that it is. If you're part of it, you're the one delivering the bad news. So you can always have a DST property as a backup option. Those are really the kind of the 9 main reasons why someone would do a DST. There's a lot more, but any questions at all on any of this? Yep.
How long do you have to keep the money in the DST if you want to sell that interest?
Her question was, how long do you have to be in the DST? How long do you have to be in it for, and can you get out early, and when can you sell, right? So when you invest in a DST, you're in it for typically 5 to 7 years. It's an illiquid investment for 5 to 7 years. And every 5 to 7 years when the property sells, right, when you buy a DST, you're getting equity interest, you're getting monthly rental income, you're getting the expenses being passed through to you, and you're participating in the upside. Each DST has nothing but incentive to sell it for a profit in 5 to 7 years because they want you to reinvest in them again in 1031 exchange out. And so if you're in it for 5 to 7 years. If you want to get out early, you can, and just not a guarantee. The DST company could buy your interest out, maybe at a little bit of a discount. There's also ways to 1031 exchange into private REITs, real estate investment trust, where you actually have access to your money in 4 years, every 30 days thereafter. So it's typically an illiquid 5 to 7 year hold. If someone's not comfortable doing it, then they probably shouldn't invest. But the REIT route provides liquidity in 4 years.
Quick question from in the back.
Yeah.
Who manages the DST?
So the DST managers, we call them sponsors. And so I'm a broker. I'm a DST broker at the end of the day, and I have access to 45 different DST opportunities that are available today to invest. And those DSTs are being managed by DST sponsors. These are real estate operating investment companies. They're the ones that buy the real estate with their money. They're the ones that are managing the day-to-day for investors. They're the ones negotiating lease terms. They're the ones moving people in or moving people out. They're the ones collecting the rents, right? They're the day-to-day operator of the real estate. That's what their whole job is to buy a good piece of real estate that they can manage expenses and grow revenue, and then sell it for a profit within 5 to 7 years, and give investor a good experience, and then have someone 1031 exchange their initial investment plus the profits into something else. And then typically when these properties sell, the DST sponsor will let me know 6 months in advance and say, hey, Gaston, you've got 6 clients in this apartment DST in Texas. We bought it for $75 million. We're selling it for $115 million after expenses. Your client's going to be looking at probably a 9% annual return. Because when you invest in a DST, you're getting a cash flow return and you're getting appreciation. So most of these DSTs conservatively are going to generate anywhere between 8 to 10% annual return over 5 to 7 years. And then that client will have 6 months to sit down with me and say, okay, well, what do I want to do next? How did I like being in the DST? I've got profit coming out of this thing. Should we do another one? Should we do another DST, or should we go buy something else ourselves? Or should we pay the taxes? So typically people have choice every 5 to 7 years to decide what they want to do next. So the question was, I've got a client doing a 1031 exchange, a traditional 1031 exchange, and they've got already 3 properties identified already. How quickly can I let you know they need something to identify, and how quickly can you identify for them before the time's up? So if you give me a heads up, I would say 48 hours. 48 hours to let me know the situation, because I need to know, okay, what's the price point? Do they have debt they have to replace? There's all these kind of parameters that I need to know to say, okay, of these 40 options that I have, these 8 meet the specifications that the client might need just to replace debt, right? And then I would like to get to know the client a little bit, maybe like a quick little speed dating, like, hey, how old are you? Do you have any kids? What are your goals? Just to kind of see which one we should identify, because in the event that they actually have to invest, we want to make sure that they're investing in the right one. But I would say 2 days from I get the call to identifying, and then they're good. 2 days. But I can do it in less, but ideally 2 days. Yep.
Two questions. One,
Yeah.
Maybe you mentioned this already, but do we get paid a referral fee from you guys if we send a client to you? That's one question. The
Yep.
other one is, what are the downsides of the DST?
So his question was, do you get a referral fee? The answer is no.
Okay, we're leaving that.
Go to why?
We're done.
Okay, that's fine with me. Yeah.
Is it not legal?
It's not legal. The DST is a real estate security. So you've got to be licensed with the SEC and have a Series 7 or a Series 63 or a Series 22 in order to actually get a commission off of any real estate security that's sold. Like I can't get paid, for selling property because I don't have a real estate license, right? So it's kind of very similar to that. I would just say kind of off the record, I've got a handful of agents that refer me and I refer them, and I help them with marketing. I help them put on events. There are some agents even here where I've spent $3,000-$4,000 and help pay for events of theirs, to market the DST and get people in a room to educate. So I'm a partner. I just can't pay a referral fee. However, most of the commissions that you're getting on the sales side are going to come from listings that you otherwise wouldn't have gotten. These are properties that you're not really going to convince someone to sell it unless the DST is the reason why they sell it. So you're really getting the sales side of the commission. I'm getting the buy side. There might be opportunities where we do both, where the DST property, maybe you're buying a DST and you're buying an actively managed real estate property, but for the most part, you're getting the listing side, I'm getting the buy side. And then what was the downside? So downside of the DST is with any property, it's really principal risk is the biggest downside. There's no personal liability. You're not going to get a call if someone trips and falls on an apartment complex in Tampa Bay, Florida. There's no personal liability. Your biggest risk is your principal risk, just with any investment. I would say, I think this is considered a risk, but the biggest hurdles that I see with people that don't want to do it or they're a little bit leery of doing it is that you don't have control. When someone invests in a DST, you don't have control. So Mr. Smith that's in it that says, hey, you should be raising rents more. It's like, well, the DST company is looking at everything, market conditions, operating expenses, budgeting to see whether or not it's feasible to raise rents. They're acting on behalf of investors. Some people would consider that a risk, and they don't have control. I could also make the argument that having control might not be in someone's best interest because they're so emotionally involved that actually getting away from it actually might be better for your wealth and your day-to-day income, right? So you can kind of make the argument that that's actually a benefit, but lack of control, illiquidity. If you have a rental property, you could sell it, probably within a couple months. If you wanted to sell it quicker, you sell it at market sale. I imagine you sell it even quicker, but you can't readily pull your money out whenever you want. It's a process of getting it out. You're typically in it for 5 to 7 years. So I would say the biggest, I have about 65 clients that I've helped invest into DSTs in 3 years. I would say 4 households have had one DST that has had to drop distributions temporarily. Of the 4 clients, 2 of them, it was because there was a hurricane in Asheville, North Carolina. There was apartment buildings in Asheville. And so the hurricanes kind of wiped out the property. So insurance is kind of taking care of it. So distributions got dropped to 0 temporarily. And then the other 2 is 2 properties in Texas because there's oversupply of apartment units right now. And so just temporarily rents have come down a little bit. But other than that, I would say 98.5% of my clients, their income's either been stable or it's gone up. So,
Okay, we have 2
yeah.
quick questions for you.
Yep.
And then I'm going to ask a couple questions. So
Sure.
we can wrap it up. Go ahead.
Okay. The first question coming from the crowd. So when you sell a rental property, what happens to the tax base? Is it transferred?
Good question. So the tax-based question I get, so tax basis is the same thing as cost basis. That's the same synonymous, just so you know. So tax basis and cost basis are very similar, pretty much identical depending on the rental property or a primary residence. If you sell a rental property and you've got tax basis, that does transfer over, but it's but that's really more so for primary resident owners.
Yes, not for investors.
Yeah.
But you can or you can't.
So
I know it's for.
what's your definition of tax basis?
Well,
Just what you pay property taxes? Okay, yeah, so that doesn't carry forward.
Okay.
That doesn't carry forward. Yeah, so if you sell your rental property, you've got certain tax basis, that goes away, and then it's increased on whatever property you buy next. Cost basis, that transfers over. Not tax basis, cost basis does.
So
Yep.
no such in Delaware, it's no such like tax basis transfer like in 1031, like regular one, no such thing.
No, you can't transfer your tax basis on a 1031 exchange. Only personal residence.
Yeah, I know. For 1031, how about for Delaware? Does such things exist?
The Delaware Statutory Trust, it's still the same rules, it's still the same 1031 exchange law.
Okay. Can you promise some minimum cap rate?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the minimum.
Guaranteed?
So the minimum, she asked about the minimum cap rate. The minimum return for most investors is anywhere between 4 to 6% annual cash flow. So if you put in $1 million, you're going to be getting 40 to 60 grand a year in cash flow. It's not guaranteed. The only thing you can really guarantee in the world of financial advisory is a fixed annuity, a CD, a money market account, or maybe a treasury bond. You can't really say the word guarantee in any other capacity. The closest thing to a guarantee is a lot of these companies that are managing these properties, they've been doing business for 26 to 50 years, and they have a track record of proven buying property, managing it, returning investor capital back, and having a positive return, anywhere between 8 to 12% a year.
Is it depreciation 27 years also? Or doesn't?
So she asked about the depreciation. So depreciation is actually going to be accelerated. So if you're in a DST, you're not just getting regular write-offs over 27 years because you're only going to be in it for 5 to 7. So the DST companies actually accelerate the rate in which they write off the property. So the income's actually virtually tax-free in the DST.
So you said I will be there just for 4-7 years. Why? Why don't I want to be longer?
Well, it just depends on the business strategy. Her question is, why would a DST company sell in 4 to 6 years? Why not sell it, later at a later date? It just depends on the business strategy, right? If you're managing a bunch of Dollar Generals or Dollar Trees with maybe a 20-year lease, you could hold on to it for 7, 8 years. But most of investors, they want access to their money. They want proof of concept. So these DST companies go in it in advance, knowing that they could buy something and sell it for a profit within a reasonable amount of time, so people actually have an opportunity to reinvest into something else. So it's just the average time frame. I've seen DSTs last 7 years, 8 years. I've also seen DSTs sell in 3 years. So it just the median is about 5 to 7 is what I've seen across the industry.
Is this such thing like foreclosure probation exist in DST?
No, there's no foreclosure types of. You mean like the types of properties that we're buying?
Yeah.
There's no foreclosure or Section 8 housing or anything like that. It's all stabilized $50 million properties or more. Stabilized investment grade properties, predictable blue chip type real estate.
Okay, we have one
Yep.
more.
So it has to do with the 1031 step up for heirs, and then how does that translate into DST?
Yeah. So if you have a rental property and you pass away, there's a step up in cost basis, right? So if that property is valued at $1 million when you die, your heirs now take over that property at $1 million valuation, and then they could sell it for $1 million, and there's no capital gain, right? That would be considered a step up in basis. That same concept takes place in the DST. So rather than an heir taking over an actively managed property that's worth $1 million, they would be taking over multiple DST interests worth $1 million, right? That someone's invested in. There's a step up in basis within the DST for the investor, and then now the heir now owns an interest in maybe an $85 million apartment building, a fractional interest in that building. That's a stepped up basis. And so that heir then gets the same benefits they would get otherwise, but rather than taking over property and having to deal with, should we sell it? Should we keep it? Should we lease it out? What do we do? Each heir now has their own interest in these DSTs, and they can decide what's best for them as an individual, rather than having to vote on what the family should do that's laid in the living trust. And so when someone dies in a DST, I'll give you an example. Someone dies in year 4. You invest in the DST and you die in year 4. and the DST property sells in year 5, right? There's a step up in basis that takes place in year 4. The DST property sells in year 5. The heir would only be responsible for taxes on just the 12 months, not on 30 years or 40 years worth of deferral. All that goes away. And a lot of times it's better for an heir not to have control over the estate right away because, what's the average time that an heir blows through an inheritance? Does anyone know?
6 months.
Wow.
1 year.
6 months. Wow.
1 year.
1 year?
3 years.
2 years is the average time it takes for someone to blow through the inheritance. So not having control over an inheritance probably would be better for family estates than having control and having just an injection worth of liquidity immediately. Maybe having something that's maybe a little more illiquid to start might be better for heirs, especially if there's grandkids involved. Any other questions on the DST? I would say, the DST is, I want to spend time on this just because I truly feel like this is the real opportunity in Southern California that's overlooked right now. $340 billion worth of real estate value between ages 60 and 80 years old. I do these types of talks multiple times a quarter, and every single person that's in the audience of my mailers are all accredited investors. They're all worth millions of dollars, and they're all over 60 years old, and they have never heard of this stuff ever. And they walk out of there with a book called Are You Tired of Tenants, Toilets, and Trash? They walk out of there like, oh my gosh, like this is a game changer. And then I start following up with them. One other just hook for you guys is if you have clients that have a primary residence that are worried about capital gains tax, I can help you. So you have to call me though if you want to find it out,
Okay,
how to help you.
What about opportunity zones?
It's another tax code that helps primary sellers shelter capital gains tax. So personal residences would qualify for opportunity zones. And that's another huge opportunity in Orange County. I think the DST is an easier topic and an easier sell because there's a few other factors within the opportunity zone. But if you have any client, any real estate owner that has a primary residence and they have aspirations to downgrade and they're worried about capital gains tax, call me. If they have aspirations to sell their primary residence without getting hammered with capital gains tax, let me know. If they have aspirations to evaluate what their situation is to see maybe they should convert their primary into a rental. Right, there's all these things to consider with primary owners because that's another market is, most of my clients that have primary residences, they've owned their primary residence maybe even longer than their rental properties, depending on if they're still living there. And they have the biggest capital gain problem is their personal residence. And so opportunity zones and oil and gas are two tax codes that can help shelter capital gains tax upon selling a primary residence. I would say even more so for the younger generation. I talked about baby boomers. I have clients in their 40s, 50s, and 60s helping, I'm helping them with capital gains tax when selling their primary residences. Yep.
How does the oil and gas one?
I want to be respectful of everyone's time. If I can start getting into oil and gas legislation, then I might be here for another hour. I want to be respectful. I'd be more than happy to talk to you one-on-one, but oil and gas as a sector has a tax code that's been around for 85 years called intangible drilling costs. And it's an active loss that can go towards an active gain or active income. And so part of my analysis and getting to know investors is, okay, what's your situation? What's your tax situation? We've got DSTs for the rental property. We've got the REIT for the 1031 if you need liquidity. You've got a primary residence. We could talk about opportunity zones. We could talk about oil and gas. We could do a combination of everything. And there's clients I've helped do all of this stuff with and have saved them a lot of money using oil and gas. I do oil and gas personally every year. It helps offset taxable income as well. I do it every year. You would think it's not a good time to get invest because of tariffs, but it's actually the best time to invest because there's discounts and just temporary with everything going on. So, anything? Yep.
I take it if you sell a DST or when you get out, you could go back to active if you wanted to.
So if you 1031 exchange into a DST and the DST sells, Yes, you can get back into the active real estate market. You don't have to do it into another DST. That's very common for people that are nervous about the current administration. They're nervous about the real estate market. They're nervous about the economy. They'd rather have their wealth parked with a $50 billion, multi-family operator, and then maybe reevaluate the real estate cycle and the business cycle in 6 years when the property sells, and maybe it's time to get back into the active market again. Yep. Any other questions?
All right.
Cool. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.